My name is Phillipa Vincent-Connolly and I'm a historian specialising in disability history, and I'm here today to talk about the inclusion or lack of inclusion of disabled people in the media, TV and film. I firmly believe that the media should reflect the society in which it lives, and how the elderly, infirm, disabled are treated says an awful lot about the society we live in, and at the present time it's not all good. I have been researching and writing about how the Tudors treated people with disabilities, and I have found a juxtaposition of different attitudes and ideas. The first one you have of them being very superstitious of anybody with any sort of physical problem, disability, infirmity, learning disability, anything like that, because they sometimes believed that the mother of a disabled child had possibly been involved in witchcraft. They were very superstitious, believed that these women were the spawn of, the babies born to these women were the spawn of Satan. So that wasn't a very good sort of outlook to have towards disabled people at all during that period. But it was all mixed up with religion and superstition and things like that. On the other hand, you had people in Henry VIII's court and his children's courts who were disabled with learning and physical disabilities, who were actually honoured and cherished because of their disability. And the reason for that is because, again, going back to religion, the Tudors considered that those with a disability were already suffering purgatory on earth. So they were to be blessed, honoured, looked after, cherished in a way that other people wouldn't be. And because they had this unique position of being trusted, the Tudors believed these disabled people had the ability to speak the truth to a monarch and his family, where courtiers might be doing it for other reasons, to get promotion, to get wherever they wanted in court at that particular time. Whereas these disabled people didn't necessarily have an agenda. And I think that's why they became really good companions for the monarchs at that time. They weren't jesters. They weren't people who were just fooling around for a laugh, taking the mickey out of other people or even themselves. They were there to provide company and, to advise the monarch in a truthful and honest way. Sometimes Henry VIII, for example, would not allow any of his other courtiers to come into his privy chamber, but he would allow William Summer to come into his chamber. He had a distinct learning disability. We don't really know what it was, because the Tudors didn't categorise disability at all, but he was often in Henry's presence when other people weren't allowed, because he had this special relationship, this special position. And the reason we know that these particular people existed, even though they weren't royal, was that they were painted in a painting that hangs at Hampton Court Palace, which is called The Family of Henry VIII, which was painted in 1545. It has Henry VIII in the middle of the painting, and alongside him is sat Jane Seymour and Prince Edward. And the reason why Jane Seymour is particularly shown in this painting is because she's the mother of the prince, even though that she died years ago. I don't think Catherine Parr would have been very happy about that, but that's the fact. But then on either side of this family group was a lady called Jane Full, who's on the left-hand side of the painting. She stood underneath an archway, and you can look past her into the courtyard of Whitehall Palace. On the other side of the painting, there is a person called Will Summer who stood under the other archway, and he's got a monkey on his shoulder who looks like he's trying to pick fleas out of Will Summer's hair, or lice or something. They loved pet monkeys, the Tudors. This was why this painting was there, because they were seen as so important to be included, because they spoke the truth, and because they were different from other courtiers. They weren't trying to get one up on each other. And this is the few records that we have of people with disability in the Tudor court. And because disability was thought to have been commonplace, this is why there are no anecdotal stories about people with disability. There are no sort of like other prominent people that had been written about at the time. So we only have sort of evidence of those particular people which were known as natural falls. Thomas More kept a fall. There were philanthropists who would do charitable giving, have them as family members in their homes. If the community couldn't look after them, for example, they'd end up going into a almshouse or a monastery where the religious orders would look after them. And if then that wasn't ever available, then they'd have to try and fend for themselves. But these particular falls that were at court weren't noble, but they weren't royal either. They were in that niche where they weren't of any particular status, but their clothing depicted that they were important, because they were dressed. Jane Fall, for example, was dressed in satins and silks, which had been ordered for her by Anne Boleyn, by Catherine Parr, by Princess Mary. Will Summer was dressed in green velvet, and that was like a royal colour based on the sumptuary laws. So this is why, you know, these two particular people were really, really important. And that's where I started my research on. But I was also looking at things like the superstition aspect, how they were hospitalised, what religion thought of disabled people, looking at other disabled people from other courts. Queen Claude, for example, the French queen who had 7 children with Francis I, she had scoliosis, hunchback, she had one leg shorter than the other, but she still managed to have 7 children, God bless her. And she would have been an amazing role model for Anne Boleyn, who served her as a lady in waiting. So she had a connection with the Tudor court. So there's all those sorts of people around, and it's been interesting to research. And one of the things I would like to be able to do, if I can, is not just because of my research, but also because I'm disabled, is I would like to be able to present the history in a programme for whoever would like to do it, so that I could help to change people's preconceptions of disability in history, and for people to think about what it might have been like as a disabled person to live then. You know, what would have happened to them? I mean, for myself, because of the complications I had at birth and the size and the weight I was, I wouldn't have survived in Tudor times. I wouldn't have survived pre-1970s. So I wouldn't have had a chance in hell. But, you know, it's an interesting thought process. And I was absolutely blown away by the research that I came up with the Tudors and disability, because it was not what I was expecting. I was expecting it all to be doom and gloom, and for attitudes to be so completely draconian, when in fact it wasn't. They were really, really positive, and they really tried to change the way that they were with disabled people and be inclusive towards them. And it would be nice to be able to get that story across so that the general public could see it. And with all the terminology that goes on around disability now, we all have to be so politically correct in the words that we use and how we speak and everything. And I think that from the point of view of myself as a disabled person putting this across, it would be something completely different, because I have a sympathy and an empathy and an understanding of my subject, which a non-disabled person just would not have. So to be able to put that across in a coherent way that people would understand and enjoy learning about, I think is really, really important. And you know, I just think it would be an amazing opportunity. We were talking earlier, I've talked to a lot of disabled people about this, that there is not enough representation of disabled people in the media at all, whether it be actors, whether it be presenters, whatever it may be. And like I said at the beginning, disabled people need to be reflected in television, film, and radio, and all those sorts of things, so that the whole media world reflects what's actually going on in society. I've met people who I've had discussions with who, previously to meeting me, had never met a disabled person before, or never had a close friendship with a disabled person before, and they were actually scared of disability and didn't want to confront it. But it's until they meet people like myself and others that their attitude begins to change, and we need to see more of that on TV so that we can get that across, that it's not anything to be scared of. We need to be able to have understanding of different people with different challenges in life, so that therefore disabled people have the same level platform as a non-disabled person, because that's all we want. All we want is equality, to be accepted for who we are and be accepted for what we can contribute to society. And I think that's a fair enough sort of evaluation of it from obviously a disabled person's point of view. And I think that it would change things if there were different minorities seen on TV a lot more than there actually are. I mean, we've had brilliant things done this month, particularly because it's Black History Month, and the historian David, who does House Through Time, and he's done things on slavery. He's an incredible presenter. And Alison Hammond last night, who did her programme on Black history. How amazing was she to do that and to put across their stories? And I'm sure there's been other things in the LGBT community, but how often do we see anybody with disabilities talking about their history or their experience? It's very, very, very rare. And I really think that does need to change.